Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series, where we take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. With this video, we'll be reviewing the sourcebook Doomed Forgotten Realms Sword Coast Gazetteer, designed by Matthew Whitby, Scott McClintock, Marc Altfuldisch, Laura Hirsbrunner, and Robert G. Reeve for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This review has been sponsored by the publisher, and a review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you are interested in a sponsor review, please reach out via email, Twitter, or Discord, or on my submission form at roguewatson.com. If you enjoy the content, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. What the hell is the Doomed Forgotten Realms? I'm glad you asked, because this is not your Elminster's Sword Coast Gazetteer. The Doomed Forgotten Realms, I have previously reviewed two products with that subtitle, and imagine, if you will, a world in which a Forgotten Realms world in which all of the 5e campaigns failed. They ended in a TPK, or maybe the heroes never got started. Whatever the reason, Storm King's Thunder, Out of the Abyss, the Horde of the Dragon Queen, Rime of the Frostmane, Tomb of Annihilation, all of these various 5e official campaign books, which take place really in the same stretch of land along the Sword Coast, have failed. And it turns out not only is that bad, because there's a lot of world-ending threats that would then be created and start ending the world, but it turns out that Vecna, the lich who's ascended to godhood and an old school D&D villain, was kind of behind the scenes doing everything and literally consuming all these souls from the ravages of all of these campaigns ending in failure, and Vecna has now been reborn and essentially rules the world. So it's a pretty dark dystopian, pretty much post-apocalyptic, although you might even call it current apocalyptic, because we're still, I think post-apocalyptic is like after the evil has taken over and I guess you're eking out an existence, which is kind of what's happening here. And yet there's an interesting Cold War between all these different evil villains, because like in Horde of the Dragon Queen, like, if you fail, Tiamat is reborn on the material plane. And it mentions in this source book that, like, well, Vecna and Tiamat basically have this Cold War going on. They don't want this mutually assured destruction, so they kind of technically steer clear of each other right now. So even though Vecna is kind of ruling the world, there's also all these other evil, like the cult of elemental evil has now arisen. All the princes are there, and they're trying to free Tharizdun, because Vecna tricked them and like, yeah, I'll bring Tharizdun up here, but he's still chained up and locked up, so haha, you can't get to him. So there's and Zariel, one of them I forgot to mention, the what's it called, Descent into Avernus. Zariel was able to not be brought back to the side of good. She's forged her sword into an evil sword, and Baldur's Gate, not just Elturel, but Baldur's Gate has also been dragged underground into hell, and in its crater place is now a place called Heldor's Gate, where she commands the forces of devils to repel the demons, who of course are now warring and spilling up from the Underdark in a lot of cases, because Out of the Abyss happened and all these demon lords were summoned and are now fighting each other. It's such a cool damn idea and a great campaign setting. Rise of Vecna is the adventure that actually tells a levels 3 through 10, I believe, campaign that takes place in this setting, and it's a really interesting, cool campaign. I think the setting is almost more interesting than the campaign that's actually weaved in there, although the campaign, it's still one of my favorite products of the DM's Guild, by the way. And I did have a little bit of problems with it, but overall I thought it did a really good job of highlighting like just cool scenes. And I realize there's a long preamble to what this source book is, but I need to be able to set the stage for it. And there was maybe a little bit of holes, in between. And then we've got this source book, which basically almost acts as, you could use it as like DLC for that campaign, or you could technically just have this and then craft your own campaign using this absolutely insanely cool dark setting, which the designer says, hey, if you've already done some of these, then just, it's a multiverse thing, right? Which is a big thing going on in the MCU right now. This is just a different version of the Forgotten Realms in which everything bad has happened, and it's a great chance for your players to even roll to play as evil characters, because factions is a big part of this source book, and you could, for example, work for the Cult of the Dragon or the Cult of Elemental Evil, and that's like the only way to like stay alive in this world is to work for an even, huge, horrendously evil threat, but maybe that's the only thing that can stop Vecna, and it's fascinating. I think the setting is really cool, and so a source book that covers that setting is very cool. And we're going to go over what it is that you get here. But if you haven't looked at Rise of Vecna, you should really look at that product. You can check out my review. I think it's a really cool campaign adventure that uses this setting. This is not an adventure book. This is a source book, which means it just gives you details on that particular setting. Also, hopefully I don't sound too nasally. I'm still getting over a bit of a head cold right now. My apologies. So the Doomed Sword Coast, the Forgotten Realms, has everything bad has happened. There's a really nice breakdown of events, kind of what I just summarized at the beginning, where all of these things happen within the course of about 5, 10, 15 years of each other. Prince of the Apocalypse, Tomb of Annihilation, Storm King's Thunder, all these events actually happen, which I think is kind of part of the regular 5-year release schedule, right? They almost do the MCU thing where they're all happening and they all kind of nod to each other and say like, yes, artist Kimber shows up in 2 of these adventures and this happens in these adventures. The obelisks show up in these other adventures. And this says, okay, yes, they all happened, but they all ended in failure, which led to the current state of being. Valo, by the way, died through whatever means, and his ghost is still communicating with us and still providing a very witty, hilarious commentary, which I love. And it's not even like this isn't Valo's source book or anything, but the designer is just like, you know what, fuck it, I love using Valo, so I'm gonna put him in there as this really delightful commentary that I loved reading. And you need that, right? Because if everything's so dark and twisted, having that little bit of humor, even if it's gallows humor, often goes over very well. And I think this does go over very well. So the first chapter just gives you kind of that brief history of events. It shows you the maps, which this map is also included in the Rise of Vecna campaign, where you can see there's literally like the Desarin Valley is on fire. The entire Icewind Dale region is covered in ice because, the rime never stopped. Basically, whatever safe holds still exist in the city are basically down to the Moonshae Isles, which is also the fleet of the Brigand Aerith. From Waterdeep Dragon Heist Jarlaxle. It's like this huge fleet of ships is basically your only kind of good guy faction that's left. Otherwise, everybody, there's Baldur's Gate is now Haldor's Gate. It's just just a crater. Fields of the Dead. It's such a cool setting. I love this idea. Chapter 2 is your faction. So this really takes factions as factions are defined in I believe it's Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that finally adds factions and patrons in a cool way, which is to say, hey, these are groups that your entire party joins and works for, and you can actually earn renown, you can go up in ranks, and then you can gain different benefits. So it's got mechanical benefits, but also obviously it's a big story thing for the DM and for the players because you actually have an organization you're working for, and especially when it comes to this big, far-reaching setting, like you really do need to work for somebody who's not just a random, individual or something. So in this case, your one good guy faction is basically Jarlaxle and the Brigand Aerith. He took off on his ship from Waterdeep, and now he's got a fleet of ships, which reminds me very much of that one alien faction from Mass Effect, Quarians, I think, where they lost their home, and so they were a bunch of just nomads in a giant fleet. That's exactly what's going on here. It's mostly dark elves still, but a lot of folks. And Jarlaxle himself is like in his submarine. I think that's a really cool idea for a faction, and being able to like travel around would obviously be very handy. You can already tell how the story would unfold here. You probably maybe begin on the Moonshae Isles and you meet up with this faction and they can take you around all these important locations, because running this campaign will be very much like a Storm Kings or Horde of the Dragon Queen, where you're traveling around quite a bit to make the most of all these different unique areas. But if you wanted to, you could work for the Cult of the Dragon. You could work for the Cult of the Elder Elemental Evil Eye. I think I used too many of those. You could work for Vecna, because Vecna has ruled everything, and Vecna controls, a lot of undead, but also is allied with the Red Wizards of Thay, the Yuan-Ti, the Orcs, all the Liches. So there's a lot of different evil factions you could work for, and you could either be evil yourselves, or you could be maybe trying to be double or triple agents, or you can just use these as enemy factions that exist within your campaign, which is why this, again, makes such a good complementary supplement to the Rise of Vecna campaign. You don't necessarily need it, and I didn't think Rise of Vecna necessarily was missing information. Maybe it was missing some specific aspects, but I definitely think this enhances it a lot. But you don't need that Rise of Vecna campaign. You could make your own campaign adventure just based on all this information that's included here. The Zentarum, of course, are nothing if not opportunistic and did survive. All the other factions were destroyed. Emerald, Enclave, Order of the Gauntlet, they were all completely wiped out by either, Tiamat or the Elder Gods, or the giant Ordnings all doing their different things, and the Frost Maiden ruling with the Frost Giants up in Icewind Dale. Like, everything's just so screwed. The biggest information here, which takes up the majority of this product, is the breakdown of locations, which if you've read, any source books or certain chapters of certain adventures, where it's basically like, hey, this isn't really, even if the rest of the campaign is a more linear story, this is just, we're going to go location by location, explain what's going on here, and maybe give some ideas for adventures, which is exactly what happens here. There is a interesting focus on cities. Actually, I think it is entirely focused on urban locations, which I get that the Sword Coast, the major areas, obviously they're going to be the cities, but it is weird that we didn't see like what's going on in like Neverwinter Forest, or in certain caves, or on the roads or something. One of my complaints from Rise of Vecna was there wasn't a lot of travel encounters, or like encounter tables, or interesting things doing with the fact that this whole world is so unique and twisted and different. How can I reflect that when we're traveling between locations? I don't think this actually solves that, but what it does is make me want to visit some of these locations, and ones that maybe were just mentioned, in a paragraph of information in the Rise of Vecna campaign, are given entire pages of information. So now we've got Evernight, which is the like Shadowfell, twisted, upside down version of Neverwinter that is just ruled by undead, completely filled with nothing but undead. It's ruled by like high level undead, and just ghouls roam the streets, and seems delightfully evil and twisted, and a great location for adventure, including what I guess could potentially be a very high level adventure, because there's a giant weapon of mass destruction, specifically of undead destruction, this thing that has the power of like the sun, that's hidden away deep in the temple within the city of the dead, and that is given an example of an epic level adventure hook, which there are about 20 of these adventure hooks throughout this entire chapter. And then there's actually an entire next chapter which covers specific campaign hooks for different tiers of play, which I'll get to in a second. But I'll go over these locations kind of briefly. Heldor's Gate, formerly known as Baldur's Gate, which now is Zariel's seat of power, and she's raised. It's kind of funny because in Descent into Avernus, it brings Baldur's Gate into Avernus, and then has the adventure start from there. In this case, it's the reverse, basically. Baldur's Gate is gone, completely wiped off the map down into hell, and now Zariel has basically created her own little fortress up on the material plane, and now we're just doing the blood war up here, baby, because we've got demons spilling up, and devils are here, and Zariel's got her whole faction here. So, and Heldor's Gate is a hilarious, like it's 83% fiends. That's pretty good. Icewind Dale is now just completely covered in frost. It's ruled by, the Dwerger with Dardarok Sunblight, has, destroyed 10 towns with the Charlatan Dragon, and the Frost Giants are allied with the Frost Maiden, and it's completely fucked in that region. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, but this is the name of the fleet of ships that belongs to the Bragan Dareth, which I love that it's got its own like government, religion, citizenry, all these places. Like, it really breaks down everything, and because it's such a unique setting, it's all very interesting to read about, and really gets those creative juices flowing for a DM that wants more information about these settings. Tiamat's throne is the soaring citadel of the Dragon Queen. I love the little joke that the defense, 2,000 dragons take to the skies around the soaring citadel. All their defenses are mundane by comparison. I agree. If you are the Queen of Dragons and you've got that many, probably don't need a whole lot of defenses. Once again, I feel like the Prince of the Apocalypse got kind of the short stick here, just because here is an example where you could have very much done a non-urban environment. The entire Desaron Valley could have been carved up between all the different elemental factions, but instead it's yet another city with just different wards that are the different elemental factions. I don't know why we're so obsessed with cities. for this campaign. I wish we would have gotten a little bit away from cities. I did like the couple, cool, like the Helldoor's Gate and Evernight especially were all very cool ideas for cities, but like we still have Waterdeep functioning. It's just a very dystopian, fascist, like Zentarum rule over it. The walking statues are now ruled by Vecna, and they keep everybody locked down, and it's, very much a police state at this point. But that's fine, but maybe I would have liked a little bit more locations that aren't just cities. We get a few minor locations, which Underdark is considered like one of the minor locations here, I guess. Candlekeep, Schult. There's an interesting side thing about the dwarves, led by King Brenner, who escaped into the elemental plane of Earth, and then the fire giants were able to come in and take over all these areas. And then one of the quest hooks for Chapter 4 is to actually ally yourself with those same dwarves, and maybe the brother of Ogromok, the elder evil earth elemental. Too many E words. And you can then have that be, but you can make that your entire campaign, or just one arc of your, like, all of these ideas. There's some really good story ideas that all of them could make for like the main quest that you're doing, or you could divide it up into chunks, which I think is really interesting. The way the designers did this in Chapter 4, they literally said, okay, we've got all these cool main quest ideas, but we're just going to divide them up between Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4, knowing that we've got enough, content and world here to go straight from 1 to 20. So I think that was a really smart way of doing it, and I enjoyed reading about all these really cool ideas. There's maybe Artist Kimber has finally been corrupted, like if he didn't have his Samwise with him, and he's gonna go give the Ring of Winter back to Sauron. No, sorry, back to the Frost Maiden or the Frost Giants, whatever. But everybody wants this artifact, and there's all these evil factions like around the world now that exist, and they're all vying for this artifact. So maybe you need to make sure that none of these, or maybe that becomes the important thing that can defeat Vecna too. You could make it a twist where it's all about the Ring of Winter in this campaign. Or maybe you need to break into Candlekeep, or you need to break into Waterdeep and get some powerful artifacts. Or maybe you need to wake up Tharizdun, and maybe you need to help the Cult of the Elemental Evil complete their quest to get it to wake up Tharizdun, and then let Tharizdun fight Vecna, and then hope for some reason that you can come out on top of that craziness. But I thought that was a really cool little chapter idea to create without even needing, again, that entire campaign book that does exist called Rise of Vecna. You could create your own campaign just based on these very cool adventure hook ideas. None of these are long, and none of these are fully fledged adventures. They are very much just story seeds or adventure hooks, but that's fine. That's what I want from a source book. If this were a campaign book, that would obviously be a complaint, but it's not. It's a source book. And finally, we get some player focused material in the final chapter. We get some new subclasses, ways to tie backgrounds into this new unique setting, some new player secrets, like from the ones that were introduced in Rime of the Frost Maiden, as well as Fateful Moments. These are all pretty dang good content. I especially love the first two subclasses that are provided here, which is the Bard College of the Elements and the Druid Circle of the Nine. The Bard College does a cool job of, obviously, and a lot of these subclasses do a good job of tying it into the the reigning factions and the power that players would be drawn from in this world. In this case, obviously, the Cult of Elemental Evil. And they do a great job of not just using spells, not like, hey, you can cast these spells or these spells. Bard's already a top tier spellcaster. So I appreciate the fact that instead you can summon like Mephits for a familiar, or you've got these different effects you can weave, elemental effects, and eventually you can do multiple ones. And then you can even cast all these certain abilities by expending your bardic inspiration, which is also smart. That I like a lot of these more recent subclasses that do that. And same thing with the druid does that as well with wild shape. It like uses the resource that the player class already has in different cool ways. In this case, you're making fire appear, you're giving somebody temporary hit points, you're just launching people into the air because you've got all these, and you're weaving all the elements together, but it's tied to your bardic inspiration, which I think is a really cool idea. The druid one is like a demonic warlock multi-class, which is pretty interesting for a druid to take that. But essentially, you can choose to invoke your wild shape as taking on this demonic visage and gaining all these really terrifying powers of this, I don't know, it's like just a bio-demon lord. And what I really like about this class, first of all, it's already cool with the way you can use wild shape in different ways. But then when you get to 6th level, you can actually, anybody who's affected, and they all involve saving throws, anybody who's affected by your abilities that you did via your demon powers, you can then make a, let's see, make sure I read this correctly. You can use an action to target a creature that's currently affected by your Hellscape Architect feature. Hellscape Architect is a great word, great phrase for a class feature. And offer it a deal. It's freedom for momentary servitude. The creature is forced to use its reaction to respond to the deal, either accepting it or declining it. And if it's accepted, it basically is charmed by you and should basically follow your commands for the next hour, unless you attack it or its allies. So that's really awesome. And if it declines, then it's stunned. I think that's a really great feature. You definitely want to be very careful to work with the DM about, okay, just don't abuse this too often, or maybe do and make that your whole thing, and we'll work with it. But I like that the DM always has the option to just decline and say, no, screw you, he's going to be stunned. But you can was a really cool role-playing opportunities for that. I thought that was a really great ability. The fighter, rogue, and wizard are fine. They're not nearly as interesting, but they are very thematically appropriate. Poor rogue is always hard because you get 3rd level ability and then 9th level ability, so it's hard to have enough abilities up front, but essentially you just make it harder for them to concentrate on spells. But you do have the opportunity to steal spells. It just doesn't happen until 9th level. The fighter is kind of a, I don't know, poor man's Vengeance Paladin or something. You're all about fear. You gain your a fear ability very early on at 3rd level, and then all your abilities are basically like, hey, if this person's afraid of you, then this happens, or you get better at fearing people. Which is, it's fine. The wizard is okay. People's like vulnerabilities and weaknesses. You have advantage on insight. You can give people vulnerabilities. It's just not as interesting as the first two, but they're fun, and I do think they're pretty thematic to different. The wizard's supposed to be like Vecna and being Lord of Secrets and all that, and the fighter is tied to like Zentarum brutality and everything, so I think that works pretty well. And then we have some fun little fateful moments. D20 table, another it's a D16 2D8 table, I guess. 16 secrets, and then some more thematically appropriate backgrounds and alternative features, because a lot of the things that existed when you might have been looking at these backgrounds probably don't actually exist anymore. For example, as an entertainer, you may actually be a public executioner instead. Are you not entertained? Let's go over my pros and cons for the Doomed Forgotten Realms of the Sword Coast Gazetteer. Pro: 6 mostly evil factions to work with or against, including the Cult of the Dragon and Zariel's Legion. Very appropriate for all of the factions that exist here, and certainly make things a lot more interesting and give a lot more tools for the DM. I think that's the right way of looking at a source book, is give me the locations and the factions is what I'm going to look at. And that's the pro is expanded details on intriguingly twisted city locations such as Evernight, Helldoor's Gate, and the Soaring Citadel of the Dragon Queen. Although they're all urban, I still thought there was a lot of really cool major locations, which are all your cities, and minor locations, which help basically fill out the world, give me the rough drafts, the cliff notes on everything. Doesn't really take a deep dive, except in those first few cities, but I think that's enough. Pro: 20 adventure ideas around the Doomed Forgotten Realms, plus campaign hooks for each tier of play. So all of those major locations had these little boldface headings. Well, I scroll down and try to find them. Like right here, for example, that one I talked about where you have to delve into the Evernight city in order to uncover this, radiant sun that can explode. That's just one of those little adventure hooks. There's like 20 of those divided up into all these locations, and you get that entire chapter of pretty cool campaign hooks that allow you to, extrapolate a full campaign or a full main quest worth of ideas from all these different tiers of play. Pro: 5 highly thematic new subclasses, as well as new secrets, fateful moments, and relevant background ties. That whole player-focused final chapter is awesome and really helps elevate this entire product into being a full-fledged, campaign setting that we want to play around in. And if you're going to stick your players in here, then might as well give them some more thematically appropriate powers to go with it. And I thought there were some cool ones there too. And Pro: Volo's sidebar commentary is a delight. I really enjoyed reading these. It's only stuff that the DM, the person who's reading this, is really gonna get, and I don't think Volo's ghost is ever really plays into. I forget in Rise of Vecna if he actually shows up as a thing, but I just love that his sidebar commentary is here, and I very much appreciate reading it. My only con is that, again, it focuses almost entirely on urban environments. Where's the forest, the caves, the roads, and counter tables, all the between lands. Usually when you get these source books, it's divided into regions, and like the city is one of the locations in that region. But instead, this one really divides it by cities, and then you've got those few minor locations. Even the Underdark is only a couple paragraphs. So I was hoping for, one of my complaints from Rise of Vecna was that there wasn't any good encounter tables for the between times. I thought that the campaign really excelled at giving me those awesome big cinematic moments that I love doing in my campaigns for sure, but it kind of dropped the ball on the between times, like getting from one location to another. It almost felt like we were just kind of teleporting around, which if you're in a small area is okay, but if you're literally taking place over the entire Sword Coast region, that's a lot of travel and potentially a lot of interesting stuff we could be doing with such a crazy setting like this. And unfortunately, this one didn't really give me that. Final verdict: Doomed Forgotten Realms continues to be one of the most exciting, fresh, and wonderfully twisted ideas to come out of the DM's Guild, and the Sword Coast Gazetteer is a definitive sourcebook for running this uniquely apocalyptic 5e campaign setting. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/Watson. Thank you.